410 days, that's how long it took. 1 year, 45 days, 7 days a week, 3 shifts a day. 3,400 workers on site every single day at peak construction, 7 million man-hours, 60,000 tons of steel, 10 million bricks, 200,000 cubic feet of Indiana limestone. The tallest building in the world, completed so fast the construction schedule averaged 1 new floor every 2 days. Here's what the official record says about how many people died building it: 14. Here's what the workers who survived say: nobody was counting. Before we're done, you'll understand exactly how 3,400 men built the tallest building on Earth in a little over a year, why they were desperate enough to do it, and what it cost them that no one would ever officially acknowledge. You'll understand why the Empire State Building isn't just a building. It's a monument to what men will do when they have no other choice. We're going to count what it actually cost, and we're going to understand why the people who commissioned it made very sure that number stayed buried. It started as a bet between 2 rich men. Actually, it started as an embarrassment. Walter Chrysler, the automobile manufacturer, announced he was building a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. The Chrysler Building. He didn't say how tall, kept the final height a secret from everyone, including the city. What he let slip was enough. Tall, taller than anything standing, taller than the Woolworth Building, which had held the world record for 17 years. The man who decided to respond was John Jacob Raskob. Raskob was a financier, vice president of General Motors. He'd already made one fortune in the automobile industry and was in the process of making another in real estate. Not an architect, not an engineer, not a builder, a man who understood money and competition, and in 1928 those two things were pointing at the same place, the Manhattan skyline. The story goes that Raskob held up a pencil and asked his architect, William Lamb, how tall they could make a building and still have it stand. Lamb told him. Raskob said, make it taller. The design they settled on, 102 floors, 1,454 feet to the top of the broadcast antenna, a building that would be the tallest in the world by more than 200 feet. Designed not just to be tall, but to be obviously, undeniably, visibly taller than anything Chrysler was putting up. Raskob brought in a partner, Al Smith. Al Smith had just lost the 1928 presidential election to Herbert Hoover, former governor of New York, South Manhattan, Irish Catholic, who'd built his political career on the streets he grew up on. He needed something to do. Raskob offered him the presidency of the Empire State Building Corporation. For Smith, it was prestige, the chance to put his name on the tallest structure on Earth. For Raskob, Smith was a weapon. His connections with New York's labor unions, his knowledge of the city's bureaucratic machinery, all of it would be needed to do what Raskob planned to do at the speed he planned to do it. They hired the architectural firm Shreve, Lamb and Harmon. William Lamb took the lead. He had 18 months to design and build the tallest building in the world. He cut it to 15. Here's what Lamb understood that most architects in 1929 didn't. The enemy wasn't engineering. The enemy was time. On October 29, 1929, the stock market collapsed. The Great Depression had begun. Raskob had already committed to the project. The site had been purchased. The old Waldorf Astoria Hotel on Fifth Avenue between 33rd and 34th Street. 600 rooms of one of New York's most storied hotels demolished in 2 months to make room. Another detail everyone forgot. The financing was in place. The plans were drawn. What the Depression changed was the workforce. Before October 1929, finding 3,400 men willing to do construction work in Manhattan at dangerous wages was a challenge. After October 1929, it was not. Men were lining up outside the site before dawn. Not dozens, hundreds, every single morning. Men who had been accountants 6 months earlier. Men who had worked in factories that were now closed. Men who had families to feed and nothing else offering. Going rate for a construction labourer in 1930, $1 an hour. For skilled workers, $1.92. Sounds like nothing. It was relative to what they were risking, but it was work, and in 1930, work was everything. On March 17th, 1930, they broke ground. There was a ceremony. Al Smith with a top hat and a silver shovel, politicians, photographers, the ritual of it. But while the cameras were pointed at Smith, demolition had already begun. The old Waldorf was coming down in real time, faster than anyone had demolished anything that large in Manhattan before, 600 rooms reduced to rubble and hauled away in trucks, while the foundation crew waited to begin. The schedule had no margin. 1 floor every 2 days, that was the target. Floor up, concrete poured, steel bolted, repeat, non-stop. 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week, including Sundays, including holidays, including rain, including cold. The site manager was Paul Starrett. His construction firm, Starrett Brothers in Eakin, had built skyscrapers before. None like this, none at this speed. Starrett understood that the only way to build a floor every 2 days was to eliminate every moment that wasn't building. The solution was a railway system inside the building itself. Here's the thing about building a skyscraper. The problem isn't height. Height is a math problem. The problem is logistics. Every floor requires steel, concrete, brick, stone, wiring, plumbing. Each of those materials has to move from street level to whatever floor is being worked. On floor 10, that's manageable. On floor 60, with hundreds of tons of material to move every single day, the logistics become the engineering challenge. Starrett solved it with a temporary railway. He laid tracks on each floor as the building rose, a miniature rail system with small carts running on those tracks, carrying materials horizontally, from the hoists to the work face. The hoists, massive motorized lifts, pulled materials vertically from street level. The moment steel arrived on site from the mills in Pittsburgh, it was hoisted up and moving horizontally within minutes. The steel itself arrived just in time. No yard on site, no stockpile. Each piece fabricated in Pittsburgh to the exact specification of where it was going, tagged, loaded, shipped by rail, arrived in Manhattan, offloaded, hoisted to the floor where it was needed, all within a few days. The building was being assembled from a moving supply chain 300 miles long. Concrete came by a different route, mixed on site, poured continuously, floor after floor. When the concrete was wet, the next floor's steel was already being bolted into place above it. At peak construction, 3,400 men were on site simultaneously. Think about what that means. 3,400 men inside a building that didn't fully exist yet, on multiple floors at once. Steel crews above, concrete crews below, brick crews on the exterior, plumbers and electricians threading their way through it all. Foremen with megaphones, signal men waving flags, workers who couldn't always hear each other over the noise of 3,400 other workers doing the same thing on different floors. The noise alone was something. Steel rivets heated in a portable forge to orange hot, thrown by hand, thrown, not handed, 30, 40, 50 feet through the air to a catcher with a metal bucket. Caught, jammed into a hole in the steel, hammered flush before it cooled, the crack of the hammer, the hiss of the rivet gun, the groan of the cranes, the thud of concrete, multiplied by dozens of crews on dozens of floors simultaneously. You could hear the Empire State Building going up from blocks away, a continuous mechanical thunder rising out of Midtown Manhattan every day for 410 days. Who were they? The official workforce breakdown lists 3,400 men at peak. Many immigrants, significant numbers of Mohawk ironworkers from the Kanawake Reserve near Montreal. The Mohawk ironworkers deserve more than a sentence. They had been working high steel in New York since the 1880s, when their community first provided labor for a railroad bridge over the St. Lawrence River. Something happened on that bridge, something that engineers and anthropologists and journalists spent decades trying to explain. The Mohawk workers were fearless at height, not reckless, fearless. There is a difference. A reckless man doesn't calculate the risk, a fearless man calculates and proceeds anyway. The Mohawk ironworkers walked steel beams at 1,000 feet above the street with the casual ease of men walking a sidewalk. They had developed over 4 decades of high steel work a set of skills and a culture around those skills that made them the best ironworkers alive. The construction company knew it, hired as many as they could get. And then there were the workers who don't appear in the official accounts at all. Labourers hired off the street on the morning of their first shift, paid in cash at the end of the week, never formally documented. Men for whom no paper trail existed because the paper trail was never created. They were doing the lowest paid, most physically brutal work, carrying materials, pouring concrete, hauling debris, paid below the union rate, rarely listed in the workforce counts that showed up in newspaper reports. This was 1930. Construction unions in New York were largely segregated. White union workers got the higher skilled, higher paid positions. The men doing the hardest physical labour, the work that broke backs and lungs and fingers, were often the men whose names were never recorded. $1 an hour for common labour. Less if you weren't on the union payroll, less if you had no leverage, less if the alternative was nothing. They took the work anyway, because it was that or nothing. Because the Depression had made nothing a real and imminent possibility for hundreds of thousands of families, and something, even brutal, dangerous something at $1 an hour, was better than watching your children go hungry. That calculation, desperation versus danger. That is what made the Empire State Building possible in 410 days. Not ingenuity, not ambition, desperation. You want to know what it was like. You showed up at the site gate at 6:45 in the morning. If you were an ironworker, you had your tools. If you were a labourer, you had your body. The foreman checked you in. You rode the hoist up to your floor, which changed every few days as the building climbed. The hoist was an open platform, no walls, no cage. You stood on it as it rose past the floors already built, past the exposed steel skeleton, past the morning sky of Manhattan opening up around you on all sides. At your floor, you stepped off onto a surface that was not a floor yet, a grid of steel beams with planks laid across them and gaps between the planks wide enough to see through. 50 floors down, 60, 70, straight to the street, straight to the trucks and the workers and the ant-like crawl of Fifth Avenue. You did not think about the drop. Thinking about the drop was not useful. You thought about the beam in front of you, the rivet in your hand, the signal from the man 3 feet away. A rivet gang was 4 men. The heater managed the portable forge, a bucket of burning coals, and heated the rivets until they glowed orange. The thrower grabbed the rivet with tongs, pivoted, and threw it. 30, 40, 50 feet through the air. The catcher had a metal cone to catch it in. The bucker-up held a steel plate against one side of the bolt hole. The catcher jammed the rivet in. The riveter hammered it. Flush, 4 men, 1 rivet every minute. Thousands of rivets per floor. The rivets were hot when thrown, cooled fast, maybe 60 seconds from catch to hammer. After that, the metal hardened and the rivet was useless. The throw had to be right. The catch had to be right. The sequence had to be right, every time, hundreds of times a day, at 1,000 feet in open air, with the wind off the Hudson pushing at 30 miles an hour. When a rivet catcher missed, a glowing piece of orange metal dropped past all the floors below. The floors below were always occupied. It would hit something, a plank, a piece of equipment, sometimes a man. This is one category of injury the official record doesn't fully capture. Falling objects, falling rivets, falling tools, falling debris. A wrench dropped from the 60th floor reaches the street at a speed that ends the conversation. And the falls themselves. Men fell, not every day, but often enough that everyone on site knew someone who had. A misplaced foot on a wet beam, a plank that shifted, a moment of inattention at the wrong place. The building offered 102 floors of opportunity to die, and the wind was always there, always testing, always looking for someone who wasn't paying attention. There were no safety harnesses, no nets until the very end of the project when a small section was finally installed, weeks from completion. For most of the 410 days, if you fell, you fell. That was the job. Show up, don't fall, get paid. Here is what the Empire State Building's official documentation says about worker deaths during construction. 5. Some sources revised it upward. The New York Times recorded 14 deaths during the construction period. Bureau of Labor Statistics for New York State noted fatalities from the site. Researchers who later went back through hospital records, police reports, insurance filings, and contemporaneous newspaper accounts found references to more. The number most historians who have studied it carefully now accept, somewhere between 14 and 40. The range is that wide because the construction company did not maintain a comprehensive death list. This was not an accident. It was policy. In 1930, there were no OSHA regulations, no federal workplace safety standards, no mandatory reporting of construction fatalities to a central agency. If a man died on a job site, the construction company was legally obligated to report it to the city and to the Workers' Compensation Board, if the worker had been formally enrolled in the workers' compensation system. Many of the men doing the most dangerous work were not enrolled, the day labourers paid in cash, the workers hired off the books, the men who existed in the company's world only as a body showing up at the gate each morning. When those men died, there was no form to fill out. There was a family to notify, maybe, if anyone knew where the family was, if the man had told anyone on site who he was or where he came from. The Depression had displaced millions of people. Some of the men working on the Empire State Building were far from home. Some had left families in other states, other countries. Some had come to New York alone, looking for work and had no one. When they died, the construction moved on. Here's the kind of death that didn't get counted. A man named Reuben Brown, the name appears in one contemporaneous account, fell from scaffolding on the upper floors in late 1930. Day labourer, not union, no workers' compensation enrolment. He'd been hired 3 days earlier. He died of his injuries 2 days after the fall. The hospital recorded the cause. The construction company's records show no mention of him. His name is not in the official count. How many Reuben Browns were there? We don't know. The records that would tell us were never kept. Some were deliberately not kept. What we know is this. Starrett Brothers and Eakin kept meticulous records of everything that mattered to the schedule. Steel deliveries, concrete pours, floor completions, inspection sign-offs. They tracked every beam, every brick, every bag of cement. They did not track deaths with the same rigour. The implication is not subtle. And then there were the injuries that weren't deaths, but might as well have been. Broken bones, crushed hands, falls that didn't kill but shattered spines and left men unable to work for the rest of their lives. Eye injuries from flying concrete chips and rivet sparks, hearing loss, permanent, irreversible, from 410 days of mechanical thunder. And the slow ones, silicosis, concrete dust breathed day after day, shift after shift, settling into the lungs, scarring the tissue, reducing capacity year by year. It doesn't kill you on the job. It kills you 10 years later when you can't cross a room without stopping to breathe. Workers' compensation for the men enrolled in it assigned dollar values to body parts. The loss of an index finger had a set amount. The loss of hearing had a value. The slow destruction of a man's lungs over 20 years of concrete dust did not have a line on the form. Not a single senior figure at Starrett Brothers and Eakin, not Raskob, not Al Smith, not anyone in the ownership structure of the Empire State Building Corporation ever faced legal consequences for any of it. Not for the documented deaths, not for the undocumented ones, not for the injuries. In 1930, that wasn't unusual. It was the system, and the system was designed to make it usual. While 3,400 men were building from the inside, Walter Chrysler was watching from 3 blocks away. His building had been completed in May 1930 at 1,046 feet. But Chrysler had kept a secret. He'd had a 185-foot stainless steel spire secretly assembled inside the Chrysler building's fire shaft. On October 23, 1929, workers cranked the spire up through the top and locked it in place. For 11 months it was the tallest building on Earth. Raskob had anticipated this. The Empire State Building's original design was revised. A mooring mast for dirigibles was added to the top. Officially, transatlantic airships would dock there and passengers would disembark directly over Manhattan. This was mostly theatre. The winds at that altitude made docking a dirigible a practical impossibility. It never once worked as intended. But the mast made the building 1,454 feet to the top of the antenna, taller than the Chrysler by 408 feet. The race was over. The workers who built the mast, the topmost floors of the Empire State Building, were working at heights no construction crew had ever reached before. The steel thinner up there, the winds stronger, the cold more brutal. Same four-man rivet gang, same process, same 60-second window from throw to hammer, just 1,200 feet above Midtown Manhattan, in November wind that came straight off the Hudson and had nothing to slow it down. Some ironworkers had limits, refused to go above certain floors. They had that right. Others didn't have limits. The Mohawk ironworkers, some of them worked all the way to the top without pausing, up to the last steel, up to where Manhattan became a grid of miniatures below them and the curve of the earth was visible on a clear day. The building rose, one floor every 2 days, then the antenna. Then it was done. May 1st, 1931, 410 days after ground was broken. Herbert Hoover pressed a button in Washington that turned on the building's lights. Al Smith stood on the observation deck on the 86th floor and watched them come on. Photographs, newsreel cameras, the tallest building in the world, completed on schedule, on budget, in the middle of the worst economic depression in American history. The newspapers called it a triumph, a monument to American ingenuity, proof that even in the depths of the Depression, America could build something magnificent. What they didn't mention, the building was nearly empty. Raskob had timed construction for a booming 1931 economy that never arrived. Only 25% of the office space was leased on opening day. New Yorkers joked that the lights were on but nobody was home. They called it the empty state building. Al Smith spent years scrambling to fill it. The observation deck became the financial lifeline. Tourists paying to stand on the 86th floor and look at Manhattan kept the building solvent through the 1930s. Raskob watched his monument to competition fail to return on investment for nearly 2 decades. Meanwhile, the 3,400 men who had built it had moved on. Most to other job sites if they were lucky, to unemployment lines if they weren't. The men who had ridden open hoist to 1,000 feet, the men who had caught orange-hot rivets in the wind, the Mohawk ironworkers who had walked the topmost steel above a city spread out below them like a map, the unnamed labourers who had mixed concrete and hauled debris in the cold for less than $1 an hour, all of them back on the street, not invited to the opening, not photographed with Hoover and Smith, not in the newsreel footage. The building they built was on every front page in America. Their names were on none of them. Lewis Hine was a documentary photographer. He had spent his career photographing child labour in factories, immigrants at Ellis Island, workers in conditions the public wasn't supposed to see. The Empire State Building hired him to document construction. He produced 1,000 photographs over the course of the build. They are extraordinary. Men on beams 1,000 feet above the street, feet dangling over the city, eating lunch like they're sitting on a park bench. Men leaning against steel in the morning light with the whole of Manhattan behind them. Men grinning at the camera from positions that should terrify any reasonable person. Find them. They're available. Look at the faces. These men knew they were being photographed. They're performing confidence, performing ease, performing the thing they were, which was men who were not afraid of what they were doing, or men who had decided that the appropriate response to being afraid was not to show it. Hine photographed them for a year. He knew their faces. He walked the floors with them. He was there. Their names are mostly not in the record, not because Hine didn't care, because the system that employed them never wrote their names down in a place that survived. The construction company's payroll records, the ones that would have names, are mostly gone. Lost, misplaced, or never preserved when the company eventually dissolved. What remains is their faces. Hundreds of faces. Men looking at the camera from places that shouldn't exist, from heights that shouldn't have been survivable, from a building that shouldn't have been possible. Nameless, permanent. The Empire State Building still stands, 102 floors, 1,454 feet to the antenna tip. It was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1986. It has appeared in more than 250 films. More than 4 million visitors a year ride to the observation deck on the 86th floor and look out over the city and feel something. The height, the wind, the scale. Something close to what the ironworkers felt every single working day. The building's original investors eventually recovered their losses. It is now one of the most valuable commercial real estate assets in the country. Its estimated current value exceeds $2 billion. The workers who built it were paid between $1 and $1.92 an hour. In 2020, researchers published an updated accounting of construction deaths. Working from newspaper accounts, hospital records, insurance filings, and police reports, every surviving source they could find, they identified references to 40 deaths during the construction period. They noted the true number was probably higher because the sources they were working from were the ones that happened to survive, and survival was random. Some records were lost in floods, some were discarded when offices closed, some were never created. 40 men, at minimum. 26 of them unacknowledged in any official count from the construction period. No memorial, no plaque at the building's base listing their names, no permanent exhibit inside the observation deck telling the story of what the construction cost, nothing that says this is where 3,400 men changed the Manhattan skyline, nothing that says people died here or that the number of people who died was a question the construction company chose not to answer. The building has been there for 93 years. The question has been there for just as long, still unanswered, still intentionally unanswered. Here is what 410 days actually means. Think about what had to go right every single morning for a floor to be built every 2 days. The supply chain from Pittsburgh timed to the hour. The 3,400 men arriving, checked in, hoisted to their floors, working simultaneously across dozens of levels without catastrophic collision. Steel crews and concrete crews and brick crews and plumbing crews all threading through the same unfinished structure. Materials arriving exactly when needed and not before because there was nowhere to store them. This was not enthusiasm. This was one of the most sophisticated logistics operations in American history, run continuously for more than a year at heights that killed people, in conditions that injured people, on a budget that had no room for delay. The building is famous. The system that built the building is not. And the system ran on men, on their bodies, on the fact that in 1930 a man's body was cheap because there were millions of desperate bodies lined up outside the gate, and the ones that broke could be replaced by the ones behind them. The Empire State Building was possible because the Depression made it possible, because 3,400 men needed the work badly enough to risk dying for $1 an hour, because the men who ran the construction company understood that and priced the risk accordingly. This is not a footnote to the story. This is the story. The record that exists about the building's construction is a record of everything that could be counted. Floors, tons of steel, cubic feet of stone, man-hours, dollars. A record of every deliverable the project required, and a deliberate silence about the men who provided them. Go to the Empire State Building. Ride the elevator to the 86th floor. Step out onto the observation deck and feel the wind. Look down Fifth Avenue. Look at the grid of the city below you. Look at where the street is. Now find Lewis Hines' photograph of the ironworker eating lunch on a beam, the one where his feet are hanging, the one where he's smiling. He is where you're standing. He is the reason you can stand there. He built it with his hands, with his nerve, for $1 an hour, with no net and no record and no recognition. His name is unknown. The building he built is the most famous in the world. They don't make them like that anymore, the buildings or the men.